Good morning, America. This is the Cats Roundtable, and this is John Catsimatidis, and it's Sunday morning. No question, our next guest, Steve Bannon, is considered one of the greatest strategists in politics. I've heard him talk during the past week or so, and I asked him to please come on to our show and give his opinions to all of America and all Americans. Good morning, Steve Bannon. How are you this morning?
Hey, John. Thanks for having me on the show. Doing great.
Well, I tell you, I was very much impressed when I heard you speak last week, and I thought that all of America should hear you. And tell us, you were a few footsteps away from the Oval Office. What was your biggest surprise or shock to learn about what happened in the world or what's going on in the world?
Well, I think, you look at how President Trump, I think, is handling the world situation, whether it's in the Persian Gulf or whether the Northwest Pacific with Korea or other situations like in Venezuela. But I think that the president's doing a great job. I think the biggest surprise for everybody, particularly all the people that attacked him relentlessly in the campaign, is how judicious President Trump is in making decisions. I mean, he really goes through not just all the material, but he asks, literally hundreds of questions of his military advisors, his political advisors, his strategic advisors about, before decisions made, like keeping troops in Afghanistan or the situation in Korea or his negotiations with China, or particularly situations like Qatar, where the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have put a blockade on Qatar because of their support of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, I'll tell you, I've known the president for 30 years or 35 years, and he does have the pulse of the situation. And my opinion is that the world leaders have much more respect for him than a lot of other presidents we've had. And he's doing a great job. That Asia trip was a phenomenal trip. How do you see this?
John, let me jump in there, because I think you bring up a great point. One of the things that was the most surprising is how world leaders, particularly the time we met with him at the UN when candidate Trump was still running in September of 2016, and then later in the transition, and then later after the president was in the Oval Office, is really the disengagement of the Obama administration. I mean, we heard from one world leader after the other that America had really kind of withdrawn, and America really wasn't engaged. And this is from a group of people who talked about what globalists they were, how tied in they were with world institutions. It was pretty stunning to have world leaders say, we just didn't get that kind of engagement. President Trump's been personally very engaged with the world leaders, whether that is President Xi in China, whether it's Abe, Prime Minister Abe in Japan, or Mohammed bin Zayed or MBS, one in the United Arab Emirates, the other MBS, the new crown prince in the King Salman in Saudi Arabia. So the president's been actively engaged, right? And one thing that I think the audience might be surprised about is that most world leaders think Obama wasn't that engaged, and that President Trump is much more engaged than he is.
Well, I was with Newt Gingrich a few weeks ago, and he says Donald Trump is draining the swamp in Washington, but the alligators from both sides are after him. What do you say to that?
Well, listen, it's drain the swamp is a phrase that President Trump came up with on the campaign trail, and it really caught on. It's very catchy, but it's kind of almost too cute by half, because this is very serious business. This business model of our elites, of the permanent political class in Washington, D.C., is that they're not going to give up control easily. You can see how they've been fighting President Trump from day one. And, John, here's one of the reasons is that, 7 of the 9 richest counties in the United States surround Washington, D.C. now. For the first time since the invention of the silicon chip, the per capita income in those counties is higher than it is in Silicon Valley, which has been the greatest creator of wealth in the history of mankind. So you see that, they have over a $4 trillion budget. The off-balance sheet spending is through the roof. These people all live like royalty. They're very detached from the hard life of daily Americans that, the regular deplorables have to go through every day. And so I think that's what President Trump's been trying to hammer. As Newt Gingrich said, he's trying to drain the swamp. But you see every day there's literally huge resistance for him trying to accomplish this.
Well, let's talk about Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. Mitch McConnell doesn't seem to have a handle on his people. I've been very disappointed in that.
John, look, you're one of the most successful businessmen in Manhattan and in the country. You know the urgency that an entrepreneur has to face the task of the day, right? You're working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, as is, most Americans today, working class Americans have 2 and 3 jobs just to put food on the table. Here's a guy that doesn't support the president's agenda, has not been moving with urgency. They work a couple of days a week. They kind of phone it in. They've done a terrible job to date of supporting the president's agenda. Now, since we started putting pressure on them, this kind of insurgency movement, right, by basically making guys like Corker and Flake 2 people that are very anti-Trump to force them to essentially retire and not run again. All of a sudden, Mitch McConnell's picking up his game. They're starting to work a few more days. They're getting more federal judges passed. They got the budget passed. They're trying to, they put forward a tax plan. But people in the audience should understand that all came because of one thing: pressure put on them by this insurgency movement, who said that we're going to remove him as a majority leader and to defeat his incumbents. And so once they get afraid of losing their jobs, because remember, their business model is incumbent upon one thing: winning re-election. That's really the business they're in. Now that he's afraid, now that he sees that the grassroots movement, whether it's in Alabama or Arizona or Tennessee or Mississippi, is going to replace his cronies like Jeff Flake and Bob Corker, now he's scared, and now he's trying to move more federal judges through the system and really start to heave to on President Trump's plan. But until he shuts down these committees that are investigating President Trump, and until he has people like Bob Corker stripped of their chairmanship, because, Corker is sitting there as the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, and with the president in war, in Afghanistan and other places throughout the world, Corker is sitting there trashing the commander-in-chief, saying he should be in an adult home, saying he's irresponsible, saying he's a guy holding hearings on whether President Trump can use nuclear weapons or not as commander-in-chief. These are outrageous things, John. This was not done to President Johnson or President Nixon during the height of the Vietnam War. And here we have Corker, who thinks he's got a free shot on goal in the president. Well, the grassroots deplorables, the forgotten men and women that really backed Donald Trump's campaign, have just said that's not acceptable. And that's why they're running out of Washington, the cronies of Mitch McConnell, and eventually they're going to run Mitch McConnell out.
The big controversy last week was Judge Roy Moore out of Alabama. And these are accusations that were made 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and all of a sudden everybody's turned on him. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the people that didn't turn are the people in Alabama. The the GOP of Alabama said they wouldn't abandon him. The governor said that the election is going to go on time. And I think President Trump summed it up best. Let the people in Alabama weigh and measure these allegations versus a radical like Doug Jones, who's a radical abortionist, who is a radical about gun rights. Let people win. The folks in Alabama have to do the voting. And I think the governor said it best, and I think the president said it best. Let the folks in Alabama decide. Sean Hannity said the same thing the other day. So I think you've got a lot of people saying, hey, this is for the folks in Alabama who really know what's going on down there. They know Judge Moore. They look at these allegations, and then, quite frankly, they see Doug Jones. And Jones, you got to remember, is a radical. He's a radical about abortion rights, and he's a radical about gun rights. And I think people in Alabama will decide that on December 12th.
I agree with you 110%. I mean, let the people of Alabama decide, not the professionals in Washington who, they're just blowing their own horn. I mean, I saw that happen with our senator in New York, all of a sudden criticizing Bill Clinton for 20 years ago. I mean,
that's a stunning revelation, because I think it's showing you, we've had this civil war inside the Republican Party for a number of years. It's kind of coming to a head in a large extent because, you remember, in the primary season of 2016, I think it was 85% of the vote went to either Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, or Dr. Ben Carson, basically outsider candidates, right, grassroots candidates. And so basically the establishment has about 15 to 17% of the total vote in the Republican Party, and the grassroots has about 80 to 85%. This civil war is just starting, John, in the Democratic Party. There haven't been people brave enough in the Democratic Party, like there have been in the Republican Party, to challenge the vested interest, to challenge the donor class, to challenge the consultants, Because these people, as soon as you try to challenge them, they come up and try to destroy you. So
I had Perez on the show last week, and I said to Perez, "Whose Democratic Party is it? Is it Clinton's? Is it Schumer's?" And he really couldn't answer it.
It's a great question, and I got to tell you seen from the Donna Brazile book that came out about how this thing was rigged against Bernie Sanders. But then Kristen Gillibrand's comment about Bill Clinton, I think, is an earthquake in the Democratic Party, because the Wall Street Clinton junta that controls the Democratic Party has really been bulletproof. And I think you saw the first opening shot of the 2020 primary with Gillibrand, who clearly has presidential aspirations. She put a shot right across the bow of the Clintons. Now, what's important is she is really dined off the Clintons and drafted off the Clinton support. Remember, she has Hillary Clinton's seat, as you know. She's been a real Clintonista, and for her to put a shot across the bow of Bill Clinton, remember on the campaign, I was the guy that thought up the idea of bringing the women that he had been a sexual predator against, Bill Clinton, to the second debate and allow them to actually confront him. They've never had a chance to do that. And these are working class men and women, or working class women. So I think it's incumbent upon the Democratic Party to really start to vet what Bill Clinton did, and quite frankly, what Hillary Clinton did as his enabler.
I agree with you 110% there too. I mean, we're going to come out the soul of the Republican Party and the soul of the Democratic Party. And what are you doing, Steve Bannon?
Well, listen, what I've done now is I'm getting ready to set up a C4 that's going to really focus on building as a convening authority, helping grassroots organizations get better at building a digital army and helping them get better at building a ground game. I think what's incumbent in the future is how President Obama really won in 2008 in his primary and also in the general election. He had a massive ground army. I think as soon as the grassroots organizations, and there's about 25 to 30 out there that are pretty active, as soon as they get better coordination and as soon as they get better understanding of how actually you build grassroots digitally and you build grassroots door-to-door physically, I think candidates will be in a lot better shape. And I think these issues will really get out in front of the American people. So it's, besides working at Breitbart, as executive chairman, I've spent a lot of time meeting grassroots organizations and talking to grassroots people and figuring out how I can support the grassroots people. John, the 2016 campaign really came down to about is America in decline? And the elites in our country, vis-a-vis China and vis-a-vis other things that they've done over the years to allow all the great manufacturing jobs to leave the United States, the elites in the United States are fairly prepared to benefit and take economic advantage of America in decline. And I think that the silent majority, the forgotten man and woman, what we call the deplorables, they don't want America to decline. They want to see America great again. And I think that's why Donald Trump's campaign slogan, Make America Great Again, resonated with working class people in Michigan and Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania. And I think that's why you're going to see a rejuvenation in this country, really a restoration of American greatness based on the back of the American man and woman who are the working class in this country.
Steve Bannon, I agree with you. And we have so many things to talk about, but we're out of time. And I hope you come back again because we do have a lot of things to talk about.
John, thank you so much. Really appreciate being on the show.
Thank you. This was the Cats Roundtable. We'll be right back.